Welcome, everyone. All right, let's get started. Hopefully some more people will file in as we get underway. My name is Bob O'Sullivan. I'm the associate publisher for Test Prep at McGraw-Hill. And welcome to our session. We're going to do a 5 minutes to a 5 AP webinar today on AP US government and politics. And we were saying before the meeting, this is our 15th of 15 AP webinars we've done, most of them in the month of March. So no small feat. Thank you to the team for doing all this. And of course, we saved the best for last. We've got Pamela Lamb, who's going to present AP US Gov. So before we begin, I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items up front. For those teachers on the line, we hope that you'll share this with other educators, but for both students and teachers are welcome in the session. It is primarily geared towards students. We did design this as a test prep focused session geared toward the students. We're about, I was going to say 6 weeks out, but it's about a month out from the test date now. So they're primarily for students, just to make that clear. If you have a question during the session, please don't hesitate to ask. We were going to be pretty stringent about waiting until the end and using the Q&A feature. What we found in doing a bunch of these is that when you have a question, ask it. Use either the chat or the Q&A feature. Pop it in there. We'll answer it. It makes it more organic, more fun, more interactive when we go through. So I think we all agree. Anything that comes up that you have a question, answer it, ask it in the chat. If you get in there and somebody's already has that question, just put a little thumbs up so we know it's important. Participants, you guys will not be able to see one another. You should be able to see and hear both myself and Pamela. We've got Anya and Simone behind the scenes on McGraw-Hill side that you'll be able to hear, if not see them. So there's that. No student data, importantly, no student data is being collected here. So no worries, no concerns about that. We're not taking anyone's name or any information at all. The presentation does have some interactivity. We have a couple polling features, some multiple choice questions as we go through. Again, it makes it more fun and interactive when people participate. So please do, if you see a poll pop up and it's for the multiple choice questions on AP Gov, please do participate, even if you don't know the answer. It's better when people jump in. And importantly, the last thing is this session is being recorded. Take a second or two to take a picture of that URL, that bit.ly with your cell phone. And this recording of the session we're about to do will be live by tomorrow. So teachers, share with your fellow educators, students, tell your friends. It's a really good resource between now and test date, a good review for everybody. So take that down, share that link with your friends, and it will be available tomorrow. At that, Pamela, if you just pop to the next slide.
Okay.
I think we're just real quickly, we'll do an intro. I'll hand it over to Pam. She's going to tell you what you might expect on the exam. She's going to go through a number of essential topics to review, a couple notes on scoring as a reader and grader. I think that's what's really tends to be super valuable to students as we go through. And you'll go through multiple choice questions, FRQ prompts. I will talk again about 5 minutes at the end, 5 or 10 minutes. We'll do, I'll show you what the online course is and how you guys have all have access to that and what it entails. And we'll end with a quick Q&A. With that, I'm going to hand it right over. Pamela.
Thank you, Bob. Welcome, everybody. I am pleased to be here today to kind of help you think about what you need to do to review for the AP exam. We are coming up on just a month and a day prior to the exam. So time is of the essence as we start thinking about the exams and getting prepped for them, our last minute reviews. Just a little bit of my background. I do have a master's in political science, and I've taught AP for 25 plus years. We're closer to 30 plus years. And I have been a grader. I have served in several different roles as a grader. First, I started as a reader, then I became a table leader, and eventually a question leader. So I've helped prepare rubrics. I have graded exams, all different kinds, including a few years ago, the international exam that was given. I have also been a College Board consultant in both government and economics. I teach macroeconomics, and have helped teachers during the summer to learn how to prepare students for these courses. Not only have I participated, of course, in writing the 5 steps for a 5 AP US government politics, but I was asked by Karen Waples, who wrote a textbook called Stories of a Nation. Some of you may be using that book. She asked me to help co-author, along with several other teachers, the document and court cases reader that you may have used in your class. I live in South Central Texas, Del Rio. You may or may not have heard of it. Very, really small town, about 150 miles west of San Antonio. We're kind of out in the desert. And I am a big Cowboy fan, along with my husband. So we're always anxious for football season. So go Cowboys. On to what we're looking at here for the U.S. Government and Politics exam itself. You probably already have an idea of what the exam is like. So very quickly, the exam is divided into 2 sections. We have a multiple choice section with 55 questions, 80 minutes. You have plenty of time to answer the multiple choice questions. It is 50% of your overall score. I have not heard of any teachers or students complaining that it's not enough time, but you probably will take close to the 80 minutes because some of the questions do involve charts, graphs, tables, even passages of a couple hundred words that you might have to read. And so you would want to take your time, especially on those stimulus-based questions. And then there are 4 free response questions. Each of those counts 12.5%. 3 of them are shorter, more like short answer questions, where you should spend probably about 20 minutes. That's a College Board recommendation. But question 4 is quite a bit more detailed. It's also 12.5%. It counts the same as the others, but you can see that it's worth more points and will probably take longer to complete. So College Board suggests about 40 minutes. Together, the multiple choice questions and free response questions are added to get a total score. When you look at the multiple choice breakdown, you have 5 units. Your teachers may have covered how many questions might come from each unit, but as you look at this chart, you might notice that Unit 2 is by far the largest unit, the interactions among the branches of government. That unit includes the 3 branches, the Congress, the executive branch. It includes the judicial branch and the bureaucracy, which in most textbooks, that's 4 chapters. So that is a good percentage, almost probably close to a third, if not a little bit more, of the overall exam. You'll also notice that Unit 5 is the second largest, and together those 2 make up over 50% of the exam. So as you start to go back and think about reviewing, certainly Unit 2 and Unit 5 might be the 2 units that you want to concentrate on your time in order to make sure that you are prepared for the larger number of questions that come from those chapters. as you think about what to review, and I added this section just to kind of give you a quick overview of some of the major topics. We know we have the 5 units that are part of the course, but also we have the required foundational documents. There are 9 of those, and the required Supreme Court cases, with a very important note that because of recent Supreme Court decisions, Roe versus Wade being overturned, there's still a lot of question about the role that that court case now plays. Is it a landmark case still, or has that changed? And so Roe versus Wade will not be tested in any way. No multiple choice questions, no free response questions about that case. So there are 14 required Supreme Court cases that you will need to know for this year's exam. And what I tried to do was go through each unit and pick out some of the most important things. You'll notice some things are underlined. Those are the foundational documents, and the court cases are underlined. Some of the things that really have shown up a lot in the past. And I'm not going to read all of this, but when you go back, if you want to go back and look at the recording, you can maybe print out these slides and then go back and look at them and do a check off. As you study the content material, you can do a check off and say, okay, do I know what the democratic ideals found in the Declaration are? Do I understand what natural rights or popular sovereignty are? Do I understand the 10th Amendment and the role that the Due Process Clause and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment play? And so you can do that for the court cases. You can do it for anything on this list that you might think, I don't know if we covered that very well. Let me go back and review that. And I did that for each unit. There's, of course, Unit 2, the interactions among those branches of government. And again, a couple of court cases there. Federalist 70, 78, Marbury versus Madison, certain departments that you might want to know within the bureaucracy. We've got civil rights and civil liberties, which that particular unit involves most of the court cases. And you will have not only court cases in the multiple choice, but you will have FRQ3, which involves a comparison of one of those 14 required court cases to a case that you probably don't know anything about. And I'll give you some more information about that as we get to the free response. But again, civil rights and civil liberties. Unit 4, American political ideologies, which includes political socialization. It also includes public opinion, political ideologies of the 2 different main political parties that we have in the United States. What's the difference between a liberal and a conservative as to the role of government? Political participation, which includes voting, elections, election behavior, third parties. It also includes political parties, interest groups, and even the media. There's really 4 major areas of political participation. And again, this is also, along with Unit 2, one of the major units of the course. Again, more political participation. So these are things you can go back and pull out later and go through this list and see, did we study this in class? Do I feel like I know enough about it? What do I know about it? Do I need to review? Do I know the role of interest groups? Can I write a free response essay that might relate what interest groups do or how they go about bringing a change to public policy? Okay, the foundational documents, here's just a list of those that you probably have covered in your class. But what do you know about the Declaration of Independence? What do you know about Brutus I? Do you know the author's main idea, main points? Not that you have to read every document in its entirety, but know the gist of what the author was trying to say and how that affects the structure of our government, how that affects the operation of our government today. And the required cases, Again, you don't have to read the opinion of the court, but what was the case about? What was the background? What brought it to the courts? In FRQ3, they usually ask a question about one of these cases that really requires you to indicate to the grader that I understand what Tinker versus Des Moines was about. I know what that case was about, and that I can explain what that case was about from its background. And then also you have to know the decision of the court or the holding. You might hear the term holding or see the word holding that says, okay, this is what the court decided. And this is then, of course, the impact of that case. So those are the main things that you need to know. You do not have to know what the dissent was from any of the justices who may have disagreed with the majority. One of my favorite things in teaching AP has been to score student essays in June at the reading. And I've kind of put together a little bit of some general notes of things. The biggest point I want to make is there is a question that is asked, and you need to read that question very carefully so that you answer the question that was actually asked. Make sure that if they ask you to identify, that's what you do. If they ask you to explain, that's going to take a lot more elaboration than just an identify. And so I have included identify, describe, explain, compare. Those are generally what students are asked to do on free response questions. And so knowing what identify is very important. If I ask you to identify the role of the president in foreign affairs, you might say that he is a diplomat. And if you want to give more detail, you can, but that would be enough. If you're asked to describe something, make sure that you talk about the characteristics of whatever that topic is. If you're asked to describe, describe the role of Congress in the passage of a bill to into a law, then you have to go through that process and you have to describe what happens at each of the different stages. Explain, this is where students generally have difficulty. Most students who do not get full credit for their free response questions don't explain. In other words, they don't elaborate enough to show either how something came to be or how it impacts something else or why it works the way it works. And so why or how a relationship exists is very important in an explanation. And I always have told my students, when you're explaining something, identify it, tell us what it is, describe it, give me a little information about a characteristic of it, and then go that extra step and say it happens or it works this way because, and give that explanation of because. Usually if you will use the term because, that forces you to make that explanation and usually will get you the points. So make sure that you do, when it's time to explain, give details, elaborate as much as you possibly can. And then compare. In AP Government and Politics, the College Board uses the term compare, and you have to connect two or more concepts. But they expect that when you compare, that you provide both how they're alike, what are their similarities, and what are their differences. So if we were asked you to compare the Senate and the House of Representatives, how are they alike? How are they different? Okay, and so you would do both. If you only tell how they're alike, you won't receive full credit. You won't receive credit for that particular question. If you only tell how they're different, you won't receive full credit or any credit for that question. You need to do both. That's a very, you might even star that, a very important fact about doing comparisons. As you do prepare for the exam, some of the things that we might think about recommending is taking a practice test. Either your teacher might give you a practice test, or you can go to the 5 Steps to a 5 book. There are practice tests in that book that you can use to see how ready you are, to see areas of strength and areas of weakness. In areas where you do really well, like you take a practice test and you do super good on all of the Unit 1 information, on the Declaration, you've got that down, on the Constitution, on the court cases that might come from Unit 1, like McCulloch versus Maryland. You got all those questions right, then you don't need to spend a lot of time, or any time maybe, reviewing Unit 1. Save that valuable time and review for other areas that you may not have done as well. So maybe in this next week coming up, we're just a month away. In this next week coming up, take a full-length practice exam. Time yourself on the multiple choice. See if you can do the 55 questions in the 80 minutes. And then next week, take another one. As you have seen what your weaknesses were, and you go back and look over those weaknesses, maybe review a couple of things that you missed, and then go back and take another practice exam. And you can take a practice exam once a week if you want, up until the time of the actual AP exam. Especially 2 weeks before the exam, again, focus on Unit 2 and Unit 5. As I said earlier, they're nearly 50% of the exam. And so a lot of points. Each one of those multiple choice questions is worth a little over 1 point. It's 1.09. So you want to get as many multiple choice correct as you possibly can. So in the 5 Steps to a 5, you can review the section on the foundational documents, the Supreme Court cases. You can use the rapid reviews at the end of the chapter, and that will give you practice on those chapters where you might find weakness. And then lastly, the night before the exam, don't stay up all night cramming. Get a good night's sleep. The test starts at 8 a.m. So you're going to be up, you're going to need a good breakfast. Go to the exam well prepared to be fresh that morning of the exam. On exam day, eat a good breakfast. You will need to take pencils, number 2 pencils, blue or black pens. Some schools provide those for students. Others require you to bring your own. Find out what your school does. You can have a watch as long as it is not a smartwatch or has a calculator on it or has any kind of storage capacity. You will not be allowed to have your cell phone. Don't even take it in the room. Leave it in your car, leave it in your locker, leave it somewhere where you're not even tempted. You can write on the test booklet as you take the test, and I always suggest that's a good idea. As you're taking the test, mark up the test booklet, use that process of elimination to take out questions or answers that you know are definitely not correct, and help yourself narrow it down to the best answer. Keep in mind that even in order to get a 5, you do not have to get 100% correct. You can still get a 5 or a 4 or a 3 by getting a majority correct. I think it's about 62, 63% correct, and you would be in the 3 range. So that's something to keep in mind, that get as many correct as you can. Every question is worth points. Don't leave anything blank on the multiple choice. You are not penalized for guessing. You you might guess correctly, use a process of elimination, narrow it down to maybe your best two, and go ahead and guess. Because if you do get it right, that's another point towards your score. And don't stress. Keep in mind that this test is a test of what you have learned in that class, and you could easily get college credit for the class, but don't stress. Just do your best and it will work out fine. So I want to use the next section to talk about the types of questions so that you are familiar with the types of questions that you're going to see. Each of the different types of questions has a special way maybe of looking at it to determine what's the best way to answer that particular question. So in the multiple choice section, we know 55 questions, 80 minutes, and half of the total exam score. There are different styles of questions. For example, there are some questions, and I will be showing you examples of each of these, that are individual questions. And in other words, they're just pretty straightforward questions, approximately 25 to 30 of those. They have no stimulus, no charts, graphs, tables, anything that goes with them. It's just a straightforward question. And then there are 5 comparison table questions. There will be 5 on the test that ask you to maybe compare political parties to interest groups, or compare the Federalists to the Anti-Federalists. Okay, and then there's quite a few questions that are what we would call set-based question, because you might have a chart, a graph, a table, something like that, and you might be asked to answer 3 questions on that one chart or on that one graph. Okay, so that's a set. 3 questions about the same information. Those questions are generally applying quantitative analysis. They might give you a table and ask you to analyze that table. They might ask you a straightforward question. Usually the first question they ask is very straightforward, just to see if you can read a table. The answer is right there in front of you. All you have to do is look for it. The second question might be to pick out a trend or a pattern that is evident from the data or information in that table. And so you would look at that data, you would look at that information, and you would look for that trend or that pattern. And then the third question, and maybe even a fourth question if there is one, generally don't refer back to the table or graph. They refer to tying the information from the table or graph to something else within government and politics. It might be a table or graph about voting trends, and they might ask you to tie that to political parties. What role do political parties play in helping determine voting trends, for example? Okay, then some of the set-based questions might be a passage or a quote from a primary or secondary source. Same thing, they would ask you to read that passage. Generally, they're not very long, but they would ask you to read that passage. One of the questions they would probably ask is, what was the author's main point? What was the author trying to say? So being able to pick out the author's point of view, the author's claim or thesis as they wrote this passage. The passage could be something from a newspaper, or it could be from one of the court cases that you have studied. It could be from anywhere. And then the visual analysis includes an infographic, a map, and a political cartoon. There will be at least one infographic on the exam and one map. Political cartoon may or may not be there, but infographic will be and a map will be. And it may be a set, or it may be just a single multiple choice question. We don't know. We just have to wait and see what they have decided. But I want to show you some examples of each of those different types of questions so that you can kind of get a feel for how you might go about addressing them and coming up with a correct answer. So this first one is an individual question. And I've highlighted really what they're asking you to do. Which of the following best describes a defect of the Electoral College? So you have to know something about the Electoral College. You have to know what people might say is wrong with the Electoral College. And you will have 4 answer choices for each multiple choice question. So here are our answer choices. The Senate, not the people, decides elections for president. Ask yourself, is that true? Does the Senate decide who is president? Electors are not legally pledged to their candidate. Can electors go and vote for anybody? The candidate winning the popular vote always wins, or federal law apportions an equal number of electors to each state. Every state has the same number of electors no matter what. And so go ahead and answer that question. A, B, C, or D.
For those of you attending live, it's easy you see the polling feature that popped up. You can just click and drag it over to the side if it is blocking the question or the choices in any way.
It looks like a lot of you picked B, which 100% picked B, and that's good because B is the correct answer. And you can see this is a pretty straightforward question. It's not super difficult. If you've studied the Electoral College, this is probably one of the first things that people talk about, the fact that an elector could go and vote for anybody at the Electoral College meeting on their date to meet. Okay, so an individual question and approximately 25 to 30 questions just like that. Okay, this is a comparison table. Notice it looks a little different. You're comparing political parties to interest groups, and you have 2 columns. Whatever is in the first column under political parties must be true for that to be a correct answer, as well as whatever is in the second column under interest groups. So if you look at A, were political parties created under the necessary and proper clause? If that's true, go ahead and read B and see if it's true, then A would be your answer. If that's not true, you can say, wait a minute, that's not true, so that can't be A. And so look at each of those and see which one where both political party statement and the interest group statement is true.
Pamela, quick time check for you. We've gone past the 30-minute mark.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
doing well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like everybody has picked answer C. Political parties want to win elections and gain control of government. Interest groups, their goal is to influence policy. And the correct answer is C. So you guys did good. 5 of those, just 5 of those that compare political parties, interest groups, Federalists, Anti-Federalists, the Senate, the House of Representatives, you know, anything that makes a good comparison. And you can think about those kinds of things. If you haven't practiced these kinds of questions, then again, the 5 Steps to a 5 book has some of these style of questions in it. And if you're using that book, then you can look at those questions and make sure you're comfortable with this style of question. Okay, you might see a line graph. This is going to be one of those set questions. And so you see a graph of Hispanic voters in the United States, and they're asking you which best describes a trend. Well, you need to know what a trend is. And a trend is usually some kind of a pattern over time. You know, I have always told my students, look for on a line graph, for example, a line that is increasing, a line that is decreasing, a line that is remaining stable, that's generally going to be what your trend is. It's not any one data point. It's going to be over time what is happening. Excuse me. And so again, read the answer choices and see which one might work best. Does it show that Hispanic voters are less likely to vote than white voters? I don't even see any information about white voters, so I would probably eliminate that. The number of Hispanics becoming eligible to vote is increasing, but the number of Hispanics who are voting, that would be the actual voters, is decreasing. You can see easily that that's not correct. Hispanics are more likely to vote Democratic, or answer D, and I can't see answer D on my screen. And that's what everybody has picked. So let me close this.
Would you like me to read it for you? It says,
yes, if you would. For some reason, all the Zoom stuff is up on my screen.
Since 1988, the number of Hispanic eligible voters and actual voters have increased.
Okay, and so as you look at at here, you can see the actual voters are increasing, and you can tell that from the graph, and the eligible voters are increasing. You can tell that from the graph. So that would be the correct answer. Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, here's a second question about that same graph. Now remember, the first one you had to get the information from the graph. This one asks you to draw a conclusion based on the information in the graph. So the graph isn't going to give you the answer, but what you know about government and politics, you can look at and draw a conclusion based on that. Go ahead and look at that, read those. Okay, some of you have put A as the correct answer. Significant growth in the number of Hispanic eligible voters has helped make the US electorate more racially and ethnically diverse. Okay, and then Hispanic voters tend to vote Republican. That's not true. The debate over immigration has not encouraged, will probably not encourage Hispanic. It might. The Hispanic vote is not important. That's not true. So the correct answer, as you said, is A. So y'all are doing great. Okay, but you can see multiple questions on that same line graph. Okay, bar graphs also, you need to be able to read a bar graph. And this one asks for a trend. Again, that's almost always been on any of the released AP exams that we have seen, practice AP exams that have come from the College Board. This is often the very first question. Look at that graph and tell us what the trend or the pattern is. In this case, the number of cases decided by the Supreme Court. A steady increase in the number of cases, decides its caseload based on the rule of 4, a decrease in the number of cases being appealed to the court, and there has been a decrease in the number of cases being decided. This is showing cases decided. We don't know how many have been appealed based on this information, so you could eliminate C. You could also easily eliminate A, because there has not been an increase, as you can see from the graph. And B, the Supreme Court decides its caseload based on the rule of 4. Well, we know that's a true statement, but is that shown in the graph in the data? Does the data show us anything about how the court decides which cases they will see or which cases they will not see? It does not. So that would not be the best answer for picking a trend. Even though it's a true statement, it's not a trend. So have you voted? You should have picked answer D, a decrease in the number of cases being decided, and you did. Very good. Second question about the same graph. Okay, which of the following is a potential explanation for the trend? Okay, so you picked out the trend. Now, why do you think that trend is occurring? Could it be because fewer cases are being appealed to the Supreme Court? Because the lower courts are making better decisions? Could it be because the Supreme Court is only composed of 9 justices and they don't have enough time to hear more cases? Could it be because justices are less likely to take on an issue in which they believe precedent has already been established, or that they might be able to provide a clear response? Or is it because Congress has mandated that they hear fewer and fewer cases? And so you have picked answer C, 100% of you, and that is the best answer. That is the correct answer. So you guys are doing super great. Okay, circle graph, also an example of a type of question you might see, sometimes called a pie graph. And again, you're looking at the information. Which of these can you glean from the information that is provided? Independents are a larger percentage of the population than Democrats or Republicans combined. Republicans are a larger percentage of the population than Democrats. More than half of the population identifies as independent, or Democrats are a larger percentage of the population than Republicans. Well, Democrats are 29%, Republicans 23%, independents 45%, so they're not more than half. Hopefully you picked answer D. That is the correct answer. And you did. Very good. Excellent. Which of the best explains the large size of those identifying as independent? Why would someone want to identify as independent? Again, you're not going to get that information from the circle graph, but based upon what you have studied in your classes, which of these following explanations is best? Americans are becoming frustrated with the way government is working and give low favorable ratings to the two parties. Many Americans claim to be independent because they are undecided voters during election time. Americans often choose to be independent because they don't have the money to join either of the parties, or the Democratic and Republican parties are too radical for most voters. Go ahead and vote. And you are excellent. Once again, answer A is the best answer. This is a chart or a table. Notice it's pretty big in the sense that it covers from 1969 all the way to 2017. How many times between 69 and 2017 have the government of the United States been divided? So you have to know what a divided government is, and then you just have to go back and count. Okay, so 2015 it was divided, 2013, 2011, and go on and count those where at least one of the 3, President, Senate, or House, is of a different party than the others. You notice this question might take a little more time because you do actually have to go back and count. This is one of the kinds of questions where you might want to write in the book. You might want to, put a check mark besides the ones that are divided government so that you can go back and easily count. And you guys are excellent. You got it right. 17 of them. Okay. And then again, based on the data shown, which of the following is true about divided government? So all of the presidents since Richard Nixon have had to deal with divided government. So find Richard Nixon way down here. Have all of them had divided government? Carter didn't. Let's see. Reagan didn't for part of his time. So that probably would not be the best answer. And so again, you have to go back and look at all the answers and kind of look at the chart. So we've eliminated A. Did Barack Obama have a divided government when he was first elected? No. But neither did Trump, so that wouldn't be true. C is the best answer. It is correct. Very good. Excellent work. And again, you can see it might take a little more time to do some of these. That's why they give you the 80 minutes. Okay, here's an example of a passage. This is actually a passage from Marbury versus Madison, written by John Marshall. And again, they're asking you, what is the author's argument? What is he saying? The particular phraseology of the Constitution of the United States confirms and strengthens the principle supposed to be essential to all written constitution, that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void, and that courts, as well as other departments, are bound by that instrument, meaning the Constitution. Laws repugnant to the Constitution. There's your key. And you are once again very correct. Government is bound by the Constitution and the laws which are in violation. He's talking about judicial review, correct? And I think that's what this next question asks. What constitutional principle is he referring to? I gave you the answer. So judicial review. Okay, you can see though that a lot of the answers are right there in front of you. Don't let these kinds of questions scare you. Okay, infographic, you will have one infographic on the exam that might have 2 to 4 questions, probably just a couple, maybe 3. And an infographic is just, it might be a picture, it might be some kind of information. This just gives you information about the current Congress in 2011 and a Congress reflective of US population. Okay, so while America is getting more diverse, the demographics of Congress are not a true reflection of American society. Based on the infographic, which of the following best illustrates the lack of diversity? Should there be more whites in Congress? Should there be fewer African Americans in Congress? Should there be more women in Congress? Or should there be more Democrats in Congress? If this is the population on the right-hand side, this would be reflective of the population, and then look at where we are. So there should be more women, definitely should be more women. Half the population of Congress would be women if it was reflective of American society. And then the second question, based on the infographic, which of the following would best create diversity? How could we create more diversity in Congress? Would it be through term limits, which would limit how much time any one person could serve, allowing for more people to serve? Would it be through increased salaries for members of Congress? Would it be adjusting committee assignments? Or would it be stricter voter ID laws? Limits on the number of terms a person can serve would allow more people to be elected, because the same people wouldn't be there for 40 years, 30 years, etc. Very good. And then there will be a map. This is a map of Medicaid spending and which is the most common level. So you just have to look at the different levels and try to pick out which states seem to have the most of the same color. There's none that I see, one that I see data excluded, so we don't need that. The 10,500 or above would be the states in the dark black. The second one is 4 states. 7,500 to 89.99 is 13 states, and 6,000 to 74.99 is 19 states. They give you that information. You don't even have to count them in the map, because if you look at the legend, you can see which of the following is most common, which one has the most. And that should be the 6,000 to 74.99. Correct. Very good. And then which most accurately explains the variation? In other words, why do some states have more spending than other states? Because they must provide the same benefits or same coverage of benefits? Is it because they don't have discretion in setting eligibility levels? Is it because the differences in the cost of obtaining healthcare in different states? Or is it states are free to pay physicians whatever they want to charge? Think about what you know about the economies of different states in the United States. Are all states economically on the same level? Okay, and you pick C, which is correct. Very good. Very good. A political cartoon may or may not be on the exam. It is possible. And so this one asks, what's the main idea or the message of this political cartoon? This guy is a member of Congress, has Congress on his podium. I don't know if you can read it, but on his pencil is the word lobbyist, and the hand is writing, nobody tells me what to do or say. And he's supposedly saying what they're telling him to do or say. And so you picked A, which is very good, correct. And which has been used to control the negative effects of interest groups. Okay, we know lobbyists come from usually being hired by interest groups. So how can we control those interest groups or those lobbyists? Okay, and answer C is correct. You guys are doing super fantastic. Okay, so as you look at those different styles of multiple choice questions, and again, you can go back and look at this again, think about how best to answer those questions. Pace yourself. Don't get bogged down. If there's a long chart or graph or table that you're having trouble with, skip that question and move on to the next one. Make sure you don't get off on your Scantron, on your lines, but don't waste a lot of time on any one question. The questions are not in any particular order from easy to medium to difficult. They're all mixed up. Some questions are more difficult than others. And if you get stuck on a question and then run out of time, there may be 4 or 5 super easy questions that you didn't get to where you don't get those points. So don't let yourself get bogged down on any one question. They're all worth the same. Make sure you try to answer all of them. You can use that process of elimination. Try to work in order as best you can, but don't lose your place on your scan sheet. Work the questions you know first, and if there's some that you don't know, leave them blank. Put a little mark out beside it so that you remember circle it on your test booklet that you can go back and again, look at it. Write in your booklet, mark it up as much as you can, and because there is no penalty for guessing, answer every single question, even if you have to guess. If you find yourself running out of time, they say you have 1 minute, and you've got 20 questions, I'd start marking that scan sheet with something, even if you don't get to read the question. Okay, has there been any questions that we need to answer?
Not yet, Pamela. I don't see any coming
Okay.
through, but if anyone has a
Remember-
question, feel free to ask in the chat.
Yes, please remember, if you have a question on anything, please feel free to ask. We want to be here to help you. Okay, and then the second section, of course, that free response, there are 4 different styles of free response: the concept application, quantitative analysis, Supreme Court comparison, and then that argument essay. For each of these, there are different point values. Concept application is worth 3 points, so you're going to be asked to do 3 different things. Quantitative analysis and Supreme Court comparison are both 4 points. So you're going to be asked to do 4 different tasks. And then the argument essay has 6 points. So there are 6 tasks. But remember, they're all equal in value. So even though concept application is only worth 3 points, it has the same value overall, 12.5% of the overall exam. So these scores are weighted to make them equal. So each point here is worth more than the points down here. So don't worry about the fact that this is worth 6 points and, oh, I'm going to lose 6 points, because that 6 points is weighted to where it's worth a total of 15 points. And this is weighted to where each point will add up to 15 points. So actually, concept application has the greatest value of all the questions. So what is that concept application? Well, you will be given a political scenario, and it is a real world scenario. It's not a hypothetical. It's not made up. It's something that has actually happened or is happening in the real world. And so there is an A part, a B part, and a C part. Now, what I've done is I've tried to put in red my hints of what I know as a reader. I have read the concept application question a few years ago, and as a reader, this is what we were looking for. In part A, you must say something from the scenario. You must reference that scenario. And I'll give you an example in a minute, but whatever that scenario is about, if it's about gun control legislation, which is my example, then you must mention gun control legislation. So you have to reference that scenario somehow in part A. Then in part B, they're going to ask you a question about what can Congress do, or what can the president do, or what can the courts do, or what can interest groups do. So you have to say what they can do, what's the action, and then what would be the impact of that action. Congress could pass a law that would set stricter limitations for purchasing weapons or purchasing guns. What's the action? What is the impact of that action? Both of those must be there to get that B point. And then the third part, you must go back again and reference the scenario. Part C usually is an explanation and tying whatever you said in part B to something outside of the question. If it's about Congress in part B, then how do interest groups influence Congress on gun control legislation? Okay. And I think the best way to show you is to show you that example. Here's an example of students at over 2,600 schools and institutions across the United States are expected to walk out of class in a national rally to protest gun violence. Activists asked students to wear orange, the official color of the campaign against gun violence, and observe a 13-second of silence in order to honor victims like those killed at Columbine, or in some even the more recent examples. The latest national rally comes more than a month after tens of thousands of students from some 3,000 schools participated in the #Enough national school walkout to demand that lawmakers seek tighter gun control regulations. The main objective of these students is to ban firearms completely and confiscate the firearms of law-abiding citizens, stated Dudley Brown, president of the National Association for Gun Rights. Excuse me. And this appeared in Politics in April of 2018. So based on that scenario, they've given you everything you need to know in the scenario. They're asking you to do three things. What's a power that Congress could use to address the issue? Okay. Congress could pass a law. Congress could hold hearings. To do what? To address gun violence. You need to mention something about gun violence, gun control, something in relation to that in that answer in order to get the points. Refer back to the scenario. If you had said Congress could pass a law, you're not going to get the points because you didn't reference the scenario. So number one, make sure in A, you always tie back whatever your answer is to something from that scenario. Okay. In part B, in the context of the scenario, explain how the Supreme Court has ruled on the issue of gun control. So think about the court cases that you know that might relate to guns, gun control. Okay, we know we have U.S. versus Lopez, which deals with guns and the banning guns on school campuses or in school zones. And we also know we have McDonald versus Chicago, or Chicago versus McDonald. So in the context of that scenario, how has the Supreme Court ruled on that? And again, you're going to mention guns. The court has ruled on such and such, and give what the ruling was. Give what the court said in McDonald. Give what the court said in Lopez. Okay. And then in the third one, in the context of the scenario, explain how the interaction between Congress and the Supreme Court might be affected by interest groups. So what could interest groups do to impact Congress and the Supreme Court's action on gun violence? Okay. So if we were scoring that, a rubric to score that might look something like this. You have to link something about gun control, describe a power that Congress has, or a power, pass gun control legislation, hold hearings on gun control issues, make sure you get gun control in there somewhere. Okay. And in part B, reference the Supreme Court case, McDonald versus Chicago, how they ruled on that particular case on gun control. And in part C, you're looking for how interest groups provide opportunities for citizens to relate back. Interest groups can hold rallies. Interest groups can lobby Congress. Interest groups can send amicus briefs to the Supreme Court as they're hearing cases related to gun control and gun issues. So do we have any questions on concept application? Go back to those 3 things that you saw back here. Make sure you reference the scenario, demonstrate an action and the impact of that action, and then again, reference the scenario in part C. Anytime you get to go back to that scenario, you're telling the reader, I understand what I read in that scenario. Okay, the second FRQ is going to be a quantitative analysis worth 4 points. So there's an A, a B, a C, and a D part. Usually the A part will be some kind of identification or description, use information or data that you see in the stimulus, whether it's a chart or a graph. You have to get A right. You have to read the chart or the graph correctly to get the B point. So if you can't read the chart or the graph in A, no matter what you say in E, you're probably not going to get that point. So you've already lost 2 points. So make sure that whatever you do in A, that you get it correct. Okay. Use information again or data from the stimulus to identify the pattern, the trend, a similarity. It might be a difference. Draw a conclusion is usually part C. That's been the trend so far, that they ask you to draw a conclusion about the data and tie that to something else. As you look at the data, how does that relate to other things in political science or in government? And then part D, how that explains federalism, or how does that explain how checks and balances work, or separation of powers, one of the major principles of the Constitution. So part B usually relates to the data, and then make sure that you explain whatever the data demonstrates in these explanations right here, and especially in part D. Okay, so here's an example. You have a table there of presidential vetoes and congressional overrides between 1961 and 2021. Okay, and so you've got when they had coinciding Congresses, regular vetoes, pocket vetoes, total vetoes, and how many vetoes were overridden. And so part A, what's the administration with the largest number of vetoes? So you just go to the total vetoes and you look and you see which one. And it looks to me like 78, Ronald Reagan. And so that's all you would have to put. Ronald Reagan had the largest number of vetoes. It's a very straightforward question and a very straightforward answer. If you had only put Ronald Reagan or Reagan, you would have got the point. I prefer, and most readers prefer, you put complete sentences. But certainly if you just had bulleted that one, they would not take that away from you. Part B, describe a pattern in presidential vetoes and congressional overrides as illustrated in the graphic. So you have to look for a pattern in either presidential vetoes and the congressional overrides. So looking at that pattern or looking at that graph, you have to come up with a pattern. And then in part C, you have to draw a conclusion about that pattern. Okay, why do you think that pattern is occurring? What's the conclusion? And then in part D, explain how presidential vetoes and congressional overrides, as shown in the graphic, demonstrate the constitutional principle of separation of powers and checks and balances. So how does this demonstrate those 2 basic constitutional principles? So if you look at a rubric, if you'd have said Ronald Reagan, you would have got 1 point. And if you go back and look, most presidents have more regular vetoes than pocket vetoes. So go back to that question, a pattern. Okay, most presidents have way more regular vetoes than they have in pocket vetoes. Not all of them, but most of them. So that's a legitimate pattern. In part C, yes.
Quick question. Paul is asking, is there a common chart they use more than others?
No, it could be anything from a pie graph or a line graph or a bar graph. It could be a map. It could be a chart, a table. It might even, I doubt if it would be a political cartoon. I don't think that, because it doesn't have the data. But it could be any of those. I have seen examples of all of them. So whether it's a graph or a chart, or possibly it probably won't be a passage. It's gonna be a graph, a chart, or a table.
Got it. Thanks for
Maybe.
your question, Paul.
Yeah, yeah. Because Congress meets, okay, here's the question, go back to the question here. Whoops, went too far. Draw a conclusion. So why do you think there are more regular vetoes than pocket vetoes? Okay, because Congress meets nearly year round, there's less likelihood of a large number of pocket vetoes. You know, Congress pocket, have to know what pocket vetoes are, but pocket vetoes can only occur if Congress has adjourned for the year. The fact that Congress meets almost year round and they don't adjourn till late December, right before Christmas usually, there's really no reason for the pocket vetoes, because Congress is still meeting. And then part D, the question was, explain how presidential vetoes and congressional overrides, as shown in the graphic, demonstrate the separation of powers and checks and balances. Well, again, one point, because of separation of powers, each branch has certain duties given to it under the Constitution. They explain that they understand what separation of powers is. And that's a good way of addressing this as an explanation. Sometimes an example, like Congress makes laws, the president can veto or reject those laws. Congress can override a veto. That shows I know what separation of powers is and I understand how it works. Okay. And that will be enough for the reader to give that point. Okay. In order to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful, the Constitution provides checks and balances for each branch. Presidential vetoes are one check the Congress has over the president. It shows that each branch of government has certain checks over the others. And again, they used an example to illustrate that they understood how checks and balances works. And that's perfectly acceptable. So if you are writing for any of these and you have an example, use that example as part of your explanation, because now whoever's reading this says that student understands what separation of powers is and how it works. That student understands what checks and balances are and how they work, and the fact that no one branch of government has too much power. And so
follow-up, there was a follow-up question. What was the importance of the overrides in Part B? Should you mention overrides in Part B?
Let me go back to the question. A pattern in presidential is illustrated. I think you could have made a case for the fact that presidents make a small percentage of overrides, or Congress overrides presidential vetoes a small percentage of the time. That could have been an acceptable answer also. And then if you'd have chosen that one in Part B, then you'd have to do a conclusion about why there are so few overrides. Does that answer the question?
So you'd have to mention, in answering Part B, you have to mention both the vetoes pattern and the overrides pattern.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Good observation, Paul. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, because you would have to show that pattern, you kind of have to show a little bit of a comparison, I guess. They have way more regular vetoes than pocket vetoes, very few overrides compared to the number of total vetoes. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Other questions? Then we'll move on to FRQ3. There are
We've got
4
about
parts.
15 minutes left, Pamela, so just
Okay.
time check. We're about 5:15
Okay, thank you.
Eastern.
Keep me on track. Okay, in the Supreme Court comparison, notice there are 4 parts, but they're only labeled A, B, and C. Part B has actually 2 parts to the question that students are expected to answer, even though they may not be directly addressed in the question as 2 parts. There are 2 parts expected. So this one gets a little tricky. In part A, usually they're asking you to identify a similarity or a difference between the 2 cases. And this is very, very specific. If they're asking, what amendment both cases dealt with, if they're asking what clause of the Constitution both cases dealt with, that has to be addressed, and you must use the correct name. If it's, let's say, the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, you have to use due process clause. If it's the necessary and proper clause, you have to use that terminology, necessary and proper. If it's equal protection, and if they say which clause, that means they're only looking for one. Okay, I know I scored a question a couple years ago that the case dealt with Texas versus Hernandez and Brown versus Board of Education, where students were asked about which clause were the cases about, and it was about equal protection. They were both about segregation. One, segregation in public schools, Brown versus Board, and Texas versus Hernandez was segregation in juries, in the court system. And if students put due process and equal protection of the 14th Amendment, they did not get the credit. They had to have equal protection, that terminology, and that terminology only. So you don't want to make a laundry list in part A and hope that one of them is right. You need to pick the right answer. Okay. And then provide relevant information about the required case. They don't give you any information about the required case. They give you all the information you need to know about the non-required case. You have to show the reader that you know what that required case is about. You might be asked to give the background of the required case. You might be asked to give the holding in the required case or the decision. Whatever they're asking you to do, make sure that you do that for the required case. And then you have to tie the 2 cases together. Show how whatever happened in the required case and whatever happened in the non-required case led to either a similar decision. They were both about segregation, and therefore the court ruled similarly. Or, they were both about something and the court ruled differently, even though they were both about applying. The one a couple years ago was Gideon versus Wainwright and Betts versus Brady, where in the Betts case, the Supreme Court ruled back in the 1940s that states don't have to provide a lawyer in state cases. And then in Gideon versus Wainwright, they come back in the 60s and reverse their decision in Betts. In other words, they overturned Betts and said, yes, states do have to provide a lawyer in criminal cases in the states. So what led to that similar decision, or what led to that different decision? And the different decision in Gideon was actually based upon one of the justices' dissents in the original case, in the Betts case. And then explain how the cases relate to a political principle, institution, process, or behavior. Again, these are the things you need to know about the required cases. What are the facts of the case? What brought it to the court in the first place? What issue, what part of the Constitution is being questioned? What was the decision, the holding? Why did the court rule the way it did? And what was that decision? Okay. So here's the Betts case, an example of that. And in order to save time, I'll just go to the question. What was the constitutional clause common to both of those cases? Both of those cases were about the right to an attorney. And so we were looking for students to say the Sixth Amendment. And so all they had to do was identify the Sixth Amendment. But the constitutional clause or the amendment or the principle or whatever you have to identify. Then based on the constitutional clause, what you said, the Sixth Amendment, why were there different holdings? Why in Betts versus Brady did they say states don't have to provide an attorney, but in Gideon they came back and said states do? And then describe a consequence of the Betts ruling on the court system, okay? And so Sixth Amendment, right to counsel, you didn't even have to identify it. All you had to do is say Sixth Amendment. If you'd have said any other amendment, or if you'd listed the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Seventh Amendment, you would not have got the point. Sixth Amendment was the only thing that would get you the point. Then you had to provide factual information, which gave you 1 point in B, and then explain how the reasoning and decisions applied to that scenario of the Sixth Amendment. And so here's some of the facts about who Clarence Earl Gideon was, what he did, way more information than was necessary, but certainly let the reader know that they understood that case. And then in the last part of it, Gideon represented himself, was found guilty, sentenced. It was based upon, he claimed that the fact that the judge did not provide an attorney, that his constitutional rights had been violated. The Supreme Court, looking at that case, said that the right to a fair trial is essential, and therefore, under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, they overturned Betts versus Brady. And then in Part C, what was an interaction between the holding in the non-required case and a relevant political institution? Well, it meant that states now, earlier states did not have to provide counsel to criminal defendants. With the decision, state governments had to change, and they had to provide counsel to state defendants. Okay, questions? Any questions? And then lastly, we have the argumentative essay. The most important part of this is the very, very first part. In this one, you do not want to label A, B, C, or D. You can do that in question 1, question 2, question 3, if it is comfortable for you. You do not have to label, but you can. In this one, they want a formal essay. And so you need complete sentences. You need to have everything like an essay that you would turn in for a grade, okay? So don't label. You have to state a thesis or claim. That's the most important thing. If you don't have a thesis or a claim that establishes a line of reasoning, elite government, the founding fathers' intent was to establish an elite government for the United States because. If you don't have that because, then you aren't going to get the points. You have to take a side. Whether you truly believe it or not doesn't matter. Pick a side. They're going to give you side A or side B, maybe an A, B, or C. Pick a side and build your case. Think about this like a debate. You're trying to convince someone that your position on this topic is the best position to have, is the most correct position. It's not your opinion. It's I'm taking a position on this topic, and this is why. Okay. And then because this is why, you're going to want to back that up with the evidence that you put in supporting that argument, in using the required documents, in using anything else you know. Remember, you're going to be given 3 required documents. You have to use one of them. You can use more than one of them if you want, but you have to use one of them. Your second piece of evidence is going to be from anything. You can use one of the required documents. You can use a court case. You can use anything you know. Okay. The required documents can only be used one time for one piece of evidence, except for the Constitution, because the Constitution has a lot of parts. So let's say that you're saying that the founding fathers wanted an elite form of government. So you say, well, in the Constitution, in Article 1, they made senators being elected by members of the state legislatures, creating an elite form of government, an elite form of election. And then later on, you come back and you use the Constitution and you say, well, the president is elected by an electoral college, an elite group, not the common people. You can use the Constitution if you use different parts of the Constitution in your argument essay. That's the only document you can use more than once. Every other document, if you pick Brutus 1, you can only use one example from Brutus 1, one piece of evidence, okay? You also have to make sure that your evidence goes back and supports that thesis or claim. And then you have to pick the other side, the side you didn't choose, and say why some people might think that's correct, but restating why your position is better. So let's look at an example, okay? We're getting down on our time. This one says whether the Constitution or the Articles of Confederation created a more democratic government. You have to pick. The Constitution created a more democratic government because, or the Articles of Confederation created a more democratic because, and give a reason. And then you have to support the claim with two pieces of evidence. One has to come from one of these documents, and the second can come from anywhere. Anything you've learned in class, anything you've studied, any other document, okay? Then you're going to explain why your evidence supports that claim and respond to the alternative position. So if I picked Articles of Confederation, I might say, some people believe the US Constitution created a more democratic government because, and a reason why they might say that, but, and then your but, the Articles of Confederation created a more democratic government, and go back and just sum it up. Okay, so for 1 point for the defensible claim and the line of reasoning. 2 points for evidence from one of those documents. A second point if you tie that document to how your evidence supports the argument. If you only give a piece of evidence and you state something true about the Articles of Confederation or something true about the Constitution, you could get that 1 point. But if you don't link it back up to your claim, then you won't get that second point. Then you need a second piece of evidence and how that supports the claim, and then your alternative. So when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you have this thesis, because if you don't get the thesis point, you only get 1 point here if you say something correct about the Articles of Confederation. Let's say you don't get the thesis, but you say the Articles of Confederation was a league of friendship among the states that created a very weak central government. That's true. You get a point, but you can't get the second point. You cannot get the second piece of evidence. You cannot get a point for supporting your evidence, and you cannot get the alternative perspective. If you don't have a claim or thesis, the most you can get is 1 point out of these 6. So the thesis becomes extremely important. Make sure you have a thesis. Okay, so free response hints, make sure you answer the prompt, answer all parts of it, usually in the order that it was asked. Use what terms you know. For example, due process, equal protection, use those necessary and proper clause, commerce clause, use the terminology, political science terminology. Be clear, concise, specific. Give examples. They may help you earn points. Use, if they ask you for the main or the primary, just give them one. Don't give them a list. Never put your opinion unless it asks for it. And I've never seen one that asks for it. So I would follow through with, you really don't need to insert your opinion. Remember, FRQ4 is not about opinion. It's about picking a side and proving it. Don't label it. Write legibly. We have to read that writing, and then be prepared. Be ready for May the 1st.
All right. Thanks, Pamela. That was a lot of really good stuff. We're right up at time. So I'm going to do this really quickly for the benefit of those attending and also those watching the recording. If you could just go one more slide, please, Pamela.
Okay.
So real quickly, guys, you now have access to our online course, our 5 Steps to a 5 online course. Take a second to take a picture of this URL and the access code, or jot it down with a pen if you're old school. mheducation.com/5stepsUSGov. There's your code. And if you can stop sharing, Pamela, and I'll start.
We'll come back to that for anyone who needs it at the end.
So real quickly, I just want to introduce you guys. Really, I would say the most important thing, can you see, Pamela? Is it going?
Yes. Yes.
The most important thing is to write down that code and explore it on your own, because that's going to be where you'll find the most value in the next month or so. So it's really easy to sign up. When you get that code, it's going to ask you for your name and your email address, and that's it. We will not spam you. You will get exactly one email from us, and that's just to verify that you're in. Nothing further. So no worries on that thing. Once you get in, the first thing you'll see is this dashboard. Because Pamela told me that the test is on May 1st. You are now at 32 days out from test day. That's getting really close. And this is our last webinar of the season. So we started out much, much further than that. So every time you come back in, today's 32 days, you come back in a couple of days, that'll be updated to either 30, 29 days out till test date. It's going to update automatically every time you log back in. It'll track your knowledge goal, your study plan progress. I've only done 1% because I ran through a couple of questions while Pamela was speaking. It'll give you a lot of feedback, percentile rank, your average scores, all this type of stuff, your strengths and weaknesses. It's a really, really a pretty robust tool in here. So the dashboard will be the first thing you see, and the most important thing will be your countdown. We now have custom practice available. So you can sort your review questions by difficulty level, by topic. It's really cool. Give it a try. You've got your basic study plan, which is real quickly just everything that's in the 5 Steps to a 5 guide, course to 5. You've got a game center, some pretty standard flashcard based games. If you're on the bus and you want to run through some terminology for AP Gov, go here. There's a discussion board. These are pretty rarely used. Wow, this one's actually the most I've seen. And this is often students back and forth. Hey, did you think number 13 was confusing? Shouldn't choice B be better than choice C? That type of stuff. Just a little bit of back and forth. This lessons format is everything broken down by topic. While Pamela was talking, I ran through the national judiciary. If I go through all the topics in the national judiciary, I can rate my confidence as I go through. Federal court system, I'm feeling pretty good about that. The structure of the judicial system, I know that. Judicial selection, court at work, got it covered. When it came to the New Deal era and the Burger Court and Rehnquist courts, I need a little brushing up. So I rated myself low. Same with judicial philosophies. As you go through, if you know stuff, rate yourself high. If you don't, rate yourself low. By the time you come back next time, you can see where you rated yourself high. You don't need to go back, and where you rated yourself low is probably smart to go back and revisit. Flashcards to me are worth the price of admission. You've got 331 flashcards here. Affirmative action, one click, you get a great definition on the back. Again, it's self-guided. You get it right, yes, you won't see it again. Agenda setting, bang, amendment, really, again, if you're on the bus or studying on the go, this is where the value comes in, and it's free and you're in. It's a really good way to review. Again, that was the first 5 of 331 cards. There's a lot of practice questions here. I have gone through, you can select either custom or category. I went through one category before. I got 36% correct, which wasn't bad for guessing. And then it'll show you all the answer explanations as you go through. Again, these are really good review questions picked up from the 5 Steps Guide. And last but not least is the full-length practice test. I think we can all agree, and Pamela will back us up here, that it's always a good idea to take at least one, if not more, full-length practice test. Even if you're feeling super confident on your knowledge and the content, it's always good to sit down for the full 3 hours, take the exact amount of questions, dedicate that time without any interruptions, and really mimic what you're going to see on test day, because it does get you ready mentally for the test. You've got a diagnostic, and in this case, 3 full-length exams, 4 additional exams. This is the most we have. Well done, Pamela. So there's a lot of practice, a lot of opportunities. Teachers out there can use these for their students. Teachers, students, tell your friends. There's a lot of good volume in here, and that's a lot of a good number of full-length practice tests. So that's it. Please do use the code. Go in, check it out yourself. I'm going to stop sharing, come back. We're 5 minutes over. I'm going to throw it back to you, Pamela, for some final thoughts.
Okay, let's see. I don't know what happened. Something happened there. Am I sharing?
Not yet. If you hit share, then you might have to hit share again.
My Zoom is gone.
Paul, the answer to your question is, so Anya, thank you for answering. For anyone else listening, Paul was asking, is it accessible by all students, this online platform? Yes. Thanks, Anya. Anyone can use it. Put the code out there. We'd like to see some more eyeballs on this thing. Here we go. So this is another reminder. Take a picture of that code, jot it down, do just a couple of seconds here. And then we'll finish up. Click more, 1 or 2, Pamela, to that last reminder URL. One more. This is the bit.ly, the URL where the recording will live tomorrow. Take a picture, jot it down. Anyone that's out there that wants to review this session, I think we can all agree, Pamela, great job. Lots of information, lots of good advice on approaching the test.
Just want to wish everybody good luck on the exam. You've got a month, you've got the tools. McGraw-Hill has provided you with tons of tools that you can do to do a review. Just make use of those tools.
Yeah. So a little bit over. I think maybe we'll give 10, 20 seconds more if anyone has any last final questions. Paul, I'm glad you came. Thanks for your participation today. And a couple more seconds. If we don't hear any more questions, we'll call it. All right. I guess we're good. Thank you, everybody. Good luck. Take care. Thanks, Pamela.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.